Welcome to the new video series in which we will talk about how to properly play in closed positions. I'm Grandmaster Davorin Kuljasevic, and my goal in this video course will be to help you understand better closed positions, to give you some concrete ideas, some techniques and strategies, which will help you play these positions with more competence and confidence. Because I know that a lot of chess players actually struggle with playing these types of positions. I have noticed this with many of my students. I also remember myself when I was a younger player. I really didn't know what I was doing in such positions. And so I really believe that it's important to study carefully and to basically have some ideas what we are doing in these positions, because there are different types of rules that govern them compared to open or semi-open positions that we get in most of our games. So one important thing about such positions is that, as the title of the course says, there is an increased importance of maneuvering. And this means that basically a lot of times you will have to use abstract thinking rather than concrete type of thinking. So, for example, you know, when you in some open position, if you calculate variations, you usually go like he plays this, I play that, he goes here, I go there, and you go move by move. On the other hand, in closed positions, this kind of approach sometimes is useless, because you don't have to think in variations. It's better to think in ideas, in plans, maneuvers. And this is why we will pay special attention to this type of thinking in the course. This is what I call schematic thinking, and we will come to that a bit later. So definitely it's important to keep in mind that we need a different type of mindset in closed positions compared to other types of positions. Now, just to make a quick definition before I give you a quick overview of these ideas and strategies, just to make a definition of what I consider closed positions for the purposes of this course. So let's say the position that we have here on the board, you can see that, of course, the center is closed. And so this is kind of the first prerequisite to consider a position closed. As I said, importance of maneuvering increases. Also, there will be a lot of flank action. So since the center is blocked, most of the play will happen on the either queen side or king side. But also, this is not necessarily the type of position that we will always analyze. I also consider closed positions those where there is still some flexibility in the pawn structure, but the center is relatively static, so it will not change for a foreseeable future, the pawn structure in the center. And there could be an open file or a semi-open file. There are such positions which are still, so the center is not blocked, but they are still kind of closed positions because both sides have to maneuver and find the best the type of flank action to actually open the position and get something. So these are the types of positions that we will analyze, and there are several important guidelines, guiding principles when you play such positions. One of them I have already mentioned. It's schematic thinking. So it's basically thinking in abstract, thinking about ideas and how you can improve your pieces, which pawn breaks you can make or prevent. So for all of this, you don't really need to calculate too much. You just have to think in ideas, in schemes. The second important thing, actually this may come as a first thing to always think in closed positions, is the importance of pawn breaks. So let's say if you look at this position, both sides will try to somehow open up the position. I mean, if it stays this way, we can just call it a draw. But if one of the sides opens up the position favorably for them, like let's say if white pushes f4, opens up the center, opens up the f-file, or if black does the same, he pushes f5, the position will open up and then something will start happening in the center and so on. And this is one of the most important things in such positions. Always pay attention to pawn breaks, both for yourself and for your opponent. Sometimes the positions will remain closed for a very long time. Let's say that black plays f5, white doesn't respond, black goes f4, and then the typical pawn storm on the king side, g5, g4, and so on. Okay, that's another type of position that can arise. But definitely we still need to pay attention. Even if such a position arises, we still have to pay attention to all the ways that the position can open up with the pawn breaks. The third important principle, beside pawn breaks and schematic thinking, is prophylactic thinking. So this is basically trying to see what your opponent is going to do. Of course, you want to do this in every type of position, but I feel like in close positions, the importance of prophylactic thinking increases because if you miss some important idea for your opponent, it's very difficult to kind of counter it, because the center is usually closed, and if your opponent gets a very strong play on one of the flanks, it's hard to create counterplay. If you are worse on that flank and you're too slow on the other flank, you don't really have that much counterplay, and this is why you shouldn't miss this idea for your opponent in the first place. So very important to prevent our opponent's ideas, if possible, while keeping, of course, track of our own active options. And the fourth important guiding principle is the breakthrough. So this is something that we don't get, let's say, in open or semi-open positions. Breakthrough means that at some point the position is completely, let's say one of the sides is better, and the position is kind of blocked. There's no breaking points, but one side definitely wants to open up the position to increase their initiative or get a decisive advantage. In those cases, a breakthrough, which often comes with a sacrifice, can completely destroy opponent's defenses, open up a corridor for your pieces to break in. And this is something that also we need to pay attention to. This often comes in later stages of the game, where our opponent has set up some sort of a defense, and we need some sort of a sacrifice or some well-prepared pawn break to, as I said, to open up some corridor, maybe an open file or a diagonal, where our pieces can break into opponent's position. So these are some of the guiding principles. Let me repeat them once more. So pawn breaks, schematic thinking, prophylactic thinking, and breakthrough. We will talk about other, of course, ideas in this course related to close positions. We'll talk about importance of outposts for pieces, especially the knights. For example, in this particular position, we see that the square c5 is an excellent outpost for the knight. Maybe the square f4 can become if the g-pawn moves forward, and so on. Because in close positions, if you have a strong outpost, it's again very difficult for your opponent to find some way to counter it. The center is not open, so he can't really look for counterplay there. We'll also talk about the importance of semi-open and open files in close positions. And there are some topics which we will not specifically cover. For example, attacks in close positions, or let's say the right and wrong piece exchanges. I mean, we will see them from time to time, but I will not, let's say, dedicate a specific chapter, a specific video to these topics. Now, let me give you a quick overview of the topics that we will cover in this course, and I will look at my notes here so that I don't forget something important. So in the first video, which is also an introduction, we will take a look at one example of inaccurate play in close positions. So in all other videos, we will try to see the right strategies, how to handle these positions properly. But in this introductory video, I want to show you a game between two masters, which was actually not played very accurately, and even though it ended in a draw, both sides had chances to improve on their game quite a bit. So, sometimes I think that looking at instructive mistakes is just as useful at looking at some master games that were played correctly. After this, we'll see two videos with the topic of schematic thinking. So I think this is probably the most important thing when it comes to close positions, thinking schematically. So for this, I prepared two videos, which will come next. And also I should mention that starting from schematic thinking all the way to video number 8, which deals with play on two wings, you will have an opportunity to test your knowledge. There will be a quiz section in which you will have a task to find the best move or best plan. And in this way, hopefully, you can get very good practice for these types of positions. So these are the first three videos, introduction and two videos on schematic thinking. The fourth video is prophylactic thinking. We already talked about it. The fifth one is breakthrough. Also mentioned it. The sixth one, outposts in close positions. Seventh and eighth, semi-open and open files. And as I mentioned, the last video in which you will get a quiz is play on two wings. So this is basically putting everything that we know together, and this is, let's say, the highest type of mastery in close positions, where you can handle correctly everything that happens on the whole board, on both wings. And then we will have, I saved let's say, the best for the end. The last four videos in this series will be games of very strong players, sort of masterclass in how to play close positions. So we'll see games of Anatoly Karpov, Boris Gelfand, Sergei Karyakin, and Ding Liren. So for each of them, I prepared one video with two instructive games. And once again, you can in these games you can see everything that we have talked about put together, because these players, of course, they have it down. They understand close positions very well, and I think these are really brilliant examples that we will see, in which we'll get maybe even some new ideas in close positions. And this is basically the overview. So there will be 13 videos. In this video, I would like to now turn our attention to, as I promised, the game that was played between two master level players. And this is actually the position from the game. So let me back up just to 5 moves back to the start to show how the opening went. So it's a red, the opening. And black played this d4 variation, which looks quite principled. Now e3 is one of the possible moves here, besides b4 and g3. Black plays knight c6. And here normally what white does is he takes on d4, exchanges the knights, the queen takes on d4, and after the move d3 he tries to expel the queen from the center. So we get, let's say, kind of really normal position with mutual chances. But in this particular game, white played the move d3, which is not principled, because it allows the opponent to create a wedge on d4 by simply playing the move e5. And now, whatever white does, black will have a pawn on d4, which gives him some extra space in the center. It also stops white from going knight c3. And already I think black has a comfortable game. Now, white probably should take on d4 to open up at least the e file. And the position is roughly equal, but he played the move e4. And this is actually the position that we had at the start. When the center is finally defined, we have a close position. But this way of playing for white is not really principled at all, because he has given the opponent more space in the center, so we see that this central wedge is very strong. And somehow white has become black, because he also lost the tempo by playing e3 and then e4. So it's almost like a position from some other opening with colors reversed, like for some Benoni of sorts, and black is really very comfortable, and I would rather even play black already. Now, black played a good move here, bishop b4 check, just developing with the tempo, and here comes the first important moment in which black understood what he's supposed to do. So he did develop his bishop, but then white just wants to expel the bishop with a3 and later push b4 as well, gaining space on the queen side. And the right move here is the one that prevents it. So black uses a little bit of prophylactic thinking, plays the move a5. Now a3 can be responded, the bishop can just retreat and there will be no b4 anymore. So black slowly tries to control things on the queen side. We mentioned before that he has c5 outpost as well. This is important. Okay, g3 and knight f6. These are all developing moves. And here white plays a move that doesn't really look necessary at this point. The idea of h3, I presume, is to prevent knight g4 intrusion in case white plays f4 later. But really that's too much prophylactic thinking, I think, and it was not necessary because, for one thing, the knight may leave f6 and then you don't really need the move h3. Also, we will see later that h3 weakens white's pawn structure. Now, after castling, bishop g2, this is an important moment for black. So he has a slight lead in development, and it's time to start thinking about pawn breaks. We said that this is the most important thing. So black would probably like to play either f5 or b5. These are his two pawn breaks. They need to be prepared, of course. And for that we need to use some schematic thinking. Try to see where our pieces belong. The move that black played in the game, knight e8, is actually not appropriate, because if you think about it, where is this knight going? Is it going to d6 maybe? But then this is not really a good square for the knight. There is a better square, like we mentioned before, and this square is c5. So the right move here for black would have been, since the bishop now is a bit misplaced there, first retreat the bishop, let's say bishop d6, and then after castling, we can go knight d7, knight c5. As we said, we're putting pressure on the c5 pawn, on the d3 pawn. And at the same time, we are bringing a piece to the queen side so that we can control some things there. We can prepare rook b8, b5 break. And on the other hand, there is an option even to prepare this break f5. Because then, if he takes, the bishop goes there. Let's look at this quickly. The bishop goes to f5, putting additional pressure on the d3 pawn, which is one of the reasons why I thought that it's not principled for white to play this way in the first place. He just has a backward pawn there. And then knight b4 may come. Anyway, the position opens up a bit. We cannot consider it closed anymore, but it's a favorable development for black, definitely. He has an easier game here. So this was the right way to handle this position. But black didn't understand this in the game, and he played the move knight e8. Now, what should white do here? The f5 break at this point is not really important, so we don't have to use prophylactic thinking with g4, because if we just, let's say, castle and black plays f5, we will get an excellent outpost on e4. So I believe that white should just castle and then focus on his own pawn break, which is the move f4. The pawn break on the other side, b4, is simply impossible with such great control. So I would probably play castles here with white, but he played the move knight h4, going for the f5 square, and this is time consuming because, of course, black will play g6, and then f4 is almost never an option, because simply the knight on h4 will be hanging after e takes f4, which means that this knight had to go back. So knight just retreats, and it feels like white lost some time again. Now the question is, how should black continue? And here black opted for a maneuver which is quite slow, and I'm not sure how much it accomplishes for him. He played the move bishop f6, trying to transfer his bishop to g7 and then play f5. However, there was no need. As I said, this is a bit slow. Now you may say that in close positions time is not so important. This is partly true, but also if I have a move that's improving or developing my pieces, then I should probably go for this move. And so bishop e6 and queen d7, let's say, was a better idea. But actually there is something else that's interesting. If black recognizes his mistake with knight e8, and he realizes that this knight doesn't belong there or on d6, he may fix the mistake by rerouting the knight to c5 anyway. And now again we have to use a little bit of schematic thinking. The knight, how can the knight reach c5 square? Well, we can play knight g7. For example, this is an interesting idea. I'm not sure if it's the best move, but definitely has makes some sense to go there, knight e6, knight c5, even though it's a bit time consuming as well. My preference here would be bishop e6, queen d7, and then I might be ready to push f5 anyway. So let us see what happened in the game. Bishop f6, slightly inaccurate, and here white plays the move a3. Now, this move can be justified maybe by trying to stop knight b4, even though this knight b4 sort is not that dangerous. But I don't like the idea, especially in connection with the next move that white played. We'll see. So, of course, black played a4, and then white played rook b1. White is not supposed to play on this flank. He is worse there. His main plan should be f4. And he is aware that he should play f4, but somehow he's trying to play on both flanks, and really he's not in the position to do that. He's the one with less space, and even if he plays b4 here, he's just going to be saddled with weaknesses. So after bishop g7, then he realized that b4 is just not good. If he does it, then of course en passant will come. Now let's say we take with the knight. And okay, black can play, let's say, b6 and try to improve his knight, maybe to go to d6. But you can see that the weaknesses in white's camp, the a3 pawn, also, you know, now c3 is maybe easier to reach at some point for black, and so on. So really, he doesn't accomplish anything by playing b4, and for that reason, playing this way, a3 rook b1 was just wrong for white. Okay, he realized in time that he needs to focus on his f4 break. And okay, now it's an important moment for black. How to, or can we even prevent the f4 break? Do we have to prevent it? That's another question. A lot of people, when they see this f4, f5 idea, they get kind of instinctively scared, because it seems like they will get steamrolled on that side of the board. But first of all, you can always make an exchange. Take E takes f4, G takes f4, and block it with f5. This is a safe option. The other option is to just keep it like this and keep it fluid and put your pieces in best squares. For example, bishop e6, f4, takes, queen d7, or queen h4, something like this. Now, of course, it would have been better for black if his knight was on c5, but that's another story. But let's see what he can do in this position. So in this position, he played the move f5, which makes some sense, but on the other hand, I don't like it because, as we will see, it opens up white pieces. It opens up his light square bishop, which was a very passive piece, and also it gives him an option to open up the f-file or get an e4 outpost, depending on what black does. So I don't think that he should have played this way, and my choice here would be, since you see that we talked about this, white has weakened his g3 pawn with the move h3 earlier. I believe that the best move here is knight to f6. And the point is that here, if I play f4, then the move knight h5 perfectly takes advantage of this weakness. So now it's very difficult to defend everything. Of course, king h2 is possible, but that gives rise to many tactical opportunities for black. For example, he can take on f4 and then go queen h4, or maybe some sacrifices on f4 are possible with attack on the this diagonal, like bishop e5. So definitely this is a problematic position for white, and he should not be playing f4 because of the knight h5 idea. And that would mean that black has the pawn breaks in control. He controls f4 break, he controls the b4 break, and basically he controls white. So white can't really do much. He can maybe maneuver, but you see that in a position where his maneuvering space is very tight, it's not easy to come up with constructive ideas. And this is one of the things, this is prophylactic thinking. So this is one of the main things, especially if you have the space advantage in a closed position. You should try to limit your opponent's pawn breaks and his active options, and then your position basically can be played on its own. So black, I think, would be thriving in this position. Now let us come back. See, so after 91, I think this is inaccuracy, f5. And now after e takes f5, black committed another inaccuracy. So instead of taking with the pawn, which is customary in such positions, he took with the bishop. Now let us quickly take a look at what happens if he takes with the g-pawn. So g takes f5 was a better choice, and now he controls the e4 square. This is very important. I assume that white would finally accomplish his f4 break, but this leads to a very interesting middle game with mutual chances. So when I take here, white has an option to take either with the pawn or with the rook. And as I said, I don't like giving white that much activity when he was so passive, but black would have his chances too. I mean, if white takes with the g-pawn, the g-file opens up, and we cannot really talk about the closed position anymore. We have two open files, and the pieces can go to many different places. It becomes more concrete. So this would be, let's say, a logical continuation of the game. But black played bishop takes f5. The position still has some, let's say, features of a closed position, because both sides have to maneuver with their pieces. And here, once again, we have an inaccuracy. So pretty much every move there is an inaccuracy. Here, white played the move g4. And you can see immediately why this move may be inaccurate. The pawns don't come back. So once you push it, the weakness next to it is permanent. And there is definitely a weakness on f4, also on h4, that there was no need basically to allow that, and I see no reason why white would not play knight e4. He has a nice outpost, and okay, the position is still roughly balanced. But playing g4, now he gave black an outpost, and we will talk about the importance of outposts in a separate video. White has one, of course, on e4, and it's very natural to exchange the knight on a strong outpost before white has brought, let's say, the other knight from e1 to f3, g5 or d2. It's very interesting to notice in this position that actually both sides have misplaced knights on e8 and e1. So it's clear from this fact that something in the maneuvering phase didn't go right. And now for black, it would be very logical to exchange this knight by playing either knight f6 or knight d6. And a better move is knight d6, because in the game knight f6 slightly inaccurate was played, and the problem with this move is that white can make this exchange on f6, and this just helps him get rid of a piece that was not very useful, the bishop from c1. And here, as I said, it would make the most sense to make a double exchange on f6 and then try to bring the knight. So let's see, like this: bishop takes, we make the exchange, and try to bring the knight closer to the center finally. Here we can either try to attack the e5 pawn by putting our pieces on the e-file. At some point we can also maneuver the knight to e4. It's important that the bishop on g2 is very active as well. So in this position, if actually the pawn was on g3, I would definitely say that white is better, but considering that he has a huge hole on f4, there is probably always a way for black to get some counterplay based on that. This is why it's important not to allow such a weakness. However, white played the move queen e2, and then black achieved what he wanted. He exchanged a strong knight. Now bishops are good on outposts, but knights are of course better. And now came actually one of the few strong moves in this game. Black found an excellent maneuver to take control over the f4 outpost. And this is the maneuver with the knight d8. So he uses schematic thinking. He imagines that the knight is better on f4 than on c6. Also, it comes with the tempo. This is important. Knight e6 attacks the bishop. And it's really surprising that after knight g2 he did not play knight e6. He played the move c6, which was a crucial inaccuracy because it allowed white to break free, as we will see. But really, after playing knight e6, okay, the bishop has to probably retreat. We see that white is ready for the f4 break. So we mentioned this before several times. You have to make sure that your opponent doesn't have the opportunity to carry out his breaks if this if this improves his position. So in this position we can play the move g5, and this way we are making sure that white remains sort of cramped, because now his knight on g2 is quite passive and he can't really open his other pieces. So the position remains kind of closed, but I feel that black is the one who has more, let's say, maneuvering latitude, and he may later try to prepare some perhaps attack on the king side, or even maybe something positional like c6, rook b8, b5 on the queen side. Definitely it's a game, but without the move f4, white is struggling a bit. However, as I said, black played the move c6, which doesn't seem necessary at this point, and now white played a good move, bishop d2, retreats the bishop from the attack, and there is nothing that black can do now about the f4 freeing move, which finally opens up the position. And after the queen exchange, it was roughly equal. So they exchanged a few more pieces, but really there was not that much to play for in this sort of symmetrical pawn structure, and after a few moves the game ended in a draw. So to an untrained eye this might seem like a fine game. I mean, both players played normal moves, but on closer inspection you see that there were inaccuracies there in planning phase, in the prophylactic thinking phase, and so some of these mistakes or inaccuracies are also quite instructive. And you can see that if players of this level around 20 to 80 are having some problems playing such positions, that it is important to study such positions carefully. And so the goal of this course, as I have mentioned, will be to study the right examples to see what the good strategies are. And I'm hoping that it will be useful for you. So stay tuned, and in the next video we will already start with the very interesting topic of schematic thinking.